Michael Jordan sucked. Okay, he was a great player for sure, but in his time with the Chicago Bulls, they could have won more if the leadership of the whole organisation was different. I'm looking at how autocratic leadership can be changed and facilitatory approaches can be brought in. And here's how. The Chicago Bulls, they won 6 championships. NBA championships. 6 is wonderful. How can you beat that? And that is very, very, very true. It's difficult to beat that, but it can be beaten. For example, at the end of the NBA last title, the 6th title that Jordan won, there was this kind of animosity between Jordan and management and the leadership as such, the whole leadership structure within the club. Now this shouldn't be or shouldn't have been the way if there's so much glory going on. If you're celebrating what was essentially the greatest player of all time in basketball, the end of his career, and yet there's this bittersweet symphony at the end of it all. How is that so? Well, it's because of the things that went on in the previous few years. Even though they won the 6 championships, there was things that were left said that shouldn't have been said, things that were done that shouldn't have been done and could have been avoided, and things that, well, weren't said. Some of these and most of these come from the leadership and the way it funnels down from the top. All good leadership comes from the top. So let's look at the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf. Now, Jerry Reinsdorf owns the Chicago Bulls, and he is raw with regard to cold hard cash because he owns up to 1.5 billion and even more probably at this time of watching. But that in itself is money, and we're talking about sport. Yes, we are. But in order for him to use that money to put into his sport and to get victories, he had to realise that things had to be done from a business point of view. And the choice of his business point of view was to employ a guy to manage the team, a guy called Jerry Krause. When he employed Krause, he wanted Chicago Bulls to win. But of course, Chicago wasn't a city, a place that was synonymous with basketball victories. In fact, the Chicago Bulls had never won any NBA title. So this was a huge mountain to climb, a huge thing, not just in the sporting world, but in the business world. So it needed tight management. So from one Jerry to the other Jerry, I know Tom and Jerry, but from one Jerry to the other Jerry, it meant that a person that owned this amount, and he owned the Sox as well, the Chicago Sox. Jerry Reinsdorf wanted tight management. He wanted results. And essentially, Jerry Krause got results. But if you look at it from the player's perspective, or the way it's communicated through The Last Dance, the Netflix documentary, you'll notice that players such as Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, these guys did not like the general manager, Jerry Krause, because he was trying to dismantle the team at different times throughout their playing careers. Now that's fair enough. Why should you dismantle a team if they're victorious? If they've won 6 out of 8 years, this shouldn't be done, you would imagine. But again, Jerry Krause is not just the general manager, he's the go-between between the owner and the coaching staff, the leadership of that team. And the leader, of course, was somebody that Jerry himself, Jerry Krause, would have employed. And the first guy he went for back in the mid-80s was Doug Collins. Now let's look at that for a second. Doug Collins was an extremely competitive man. And Michael Jordan was just in the club, well, not a wet week. And he was young, he was raw, and he was extremely athletic and had huge basketball ability. And with that, he had to link with this coach, this day-to-day coach that was Doug Collins. And he did. He fed into his particular personality traits. And his main personality traits of Collins was similar to what Jordan's was. And that was that he was a winner. He would be drenched with sweat coming off the court after each game. And he wasn't even playing, he wasn't partaking in it. But Jordan loved that. He loved that attitude. And for him, he didn't want to play with anybody else or for anybody else. And then suddenly Jerry Krause then makes the decision to boot him out, to get rid of Collins. And then this causes disruption for not only Jordan, but it filters throughout the team. And what happens? Well, he employs this guy, Phil. Phil Jackson comes in, a former basketballer, a guy who had coached in a different country in South America. So it didn't really have this credibility amongst the players. So it took time for Phil Jackson's persona to be actually respected. Jackson was more of a laid-back character. He had more an understanding of people from a holistic point of view. He actually, they said, or portrayed him as a bit of a hippie back when he was younger, when he was playing himself, that he actually was one who would just not flow with the regular basketball crowd, the regular role models that were supposed to be these basketballers in the professional league in America at the time. Rather, he would go and hang with other people that were more easygoing and kind of against the autocratic ways of, such as the military aspect. That was his time. But that was his basis of how he began to manage. And he wanted to partake in coaching insofar as putting in tactical know-how within the team, like a triangular type of pattern where there was a lot of passing and all of the team members got hold of the ball. This is what he wanted to impart within the team. But of course, Michael Jordan didn't like this because the light was shone on Michael Jordan. He was a star. He was getting 50 plus points per game at times. He was the one that everybody was giving the ball to so that he could just go forward and score. And yes, he had the ability to score. And yes, he had the extreme tunnel vision and confidence and determination to do it. There's no doubt about that. He was a wonderful player. But Michael Jordan sucked at actually keeping that chain of management and leadership more so going within the team. That was one thing he was not good at. He could have been better at. Yes, he motivated players. But when it came to actually long-term people not falling out with him, he did fall out with certain players. He wasn't the closest guy. They even said it in the last episode where he wrote a poem when they broke up and they dismantled their thoughts of all the seasons they played together, the Chicago Bulls, and were victorious. And even Phil Jackson noted that I didn't think he actually had that emotional ability within him. So if the coach didn't believe the star player could have that emotional connection with people, how could other people within the group playing with him day to day connect with him one-to-one? And maybe that was the thing. He was more austere, he was more authoritarian. And that's fine if he was. But early on they portrayed him as not liking Jerry Krause. But the reality was Jerry Krause is just a middleman between the owner and the actual coach and team. He has to look at the macro area that is the business fold around the world and around the basketball business as such, and try and look at the longevity of players, the age group of the players, and trade and take all of the players' injuries and determinations of whether they're hungry or not or motivated or not to win a next round game or whatever into consideration. This is his perspective. It didn't show in that particular viewing whether Jerry Krause and Phil Jackson were close or not. It didn't show what their conversations were in general. It showed the animosity between Jordan, the players, and Jerry Krause, but it didn't show how Krause could defend himself, because you know what? Krause died in 2017. The documentary came out in 2020. So Krause didn't get to actually give his side of the story. As they say, there's two sides to every story. Steve Kerr, one of the players who had his father was murdered. Also Michael Jordan, his father was murdered too, but they never had that connection as people until they bashed on court one day when they were practicing. And even still, they never went deeper than that, because why? Michael never showed that emotional stuff to other people. Why? Because he perhaps didn't have that ability to be facilitatory. It wasn't until Phil Jackson brought in this triangular period of play, and eventually Jordan had to cope with it and saw the benefit of it and realised that he could be a different type of player himself. He had to open his mind up to things. It all came from the authority at the top, the owner. Jerry Reinsdorf. He was the guy that wanted to make money. He was the guy that, bottom line, made the money. So the disconnection between all the different leaders of Jordan, even you could say Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson, Jerry Krause, that should have been glued tight. These are the day-to-day people. But yet, the guy at the top of the pyramid, he was just dangling the strings. And he did it from an authoritarian point of view rather than a democratic point of view. If he'd done it from a democratic point of view, it could have been also better. There wouldn't have been trades. They wouldn't have been at the end of careers at times when the Chicago Bulls were dominating that 7th title. So check me out now as I'm trying to do what Jordan did. It's not easy, but I did my very best. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have subscribed, thanks very much up until now. If you haven't, well, please do. Until next time, and have a wonderful day.